Welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for the latest in our series of congressional conversations. My name is Akash Chougule. I'm the Vice President of Americans for Prosperity, and we are honored to be joined today by Congressman Kelly Armstrong, who represents the at-large district from North Dakota.
Yeah, I get to be your favorite congressman from North Dakota and your least favorite. I get to be both.
Well, we're glad to have you and very much appreciate you doing this. Obviously, as we're now past Labor Day, people are starting to get kind of re-tuned in to politics and policy, what's happening on the Hill. But there's been plenty going on all year that folks really haven't had any choice but to pay attention to when it comes to their cost of living, the economy, and making ends meet for their family. So as we look back on how this year has been, with inflation at a 40-year high, we just got out of a summer of record high gas prices. What has been the feedback that you've gotten throughout this year so far in your district and your state?
Well, and I think it's even worse than that, right? Wall Street just went into a bear market. I have constituents that have lost 40% of their 401ks. And from North Dakota, it's especially frustrating because ag and energy is what we do, and we do it really well. And if you're a cattle rancher and you walk into a grocery store, if you can find steak and it's twice as expensive as it was a year ago, and you know not a single penny of that increase is coming back to your operation, you're not interested in having a nuanced conversation about supply chains. You're pissed off. And if you're an unemployed pipeline worker because the Keystone XL got canceled and your energy costs are up 35% from where they were last year before we get into winter, you're not interested in having a nuanced conversation about energy. You're angry about it because it's affecting your family to the tune of about $700 a month. It's the most regressive tax you can possibly have. When eggs and bread and energy are going up, you have real issues at home. And when you come from a state like mine that is part of the solution to this, if the federal government would just get out of the way, it gets really, really frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, you have plenty of energy right there underfoot that hasn't been able to be developed because of the policies of this administration. I mean, what do you see as far as the situation, what's happening on the other side of the world, the impact that's had on gas prices? I mean, how frustrating is it? What are you hearing both from families and businesses about what North Dakota could offer as a solution?
Well, and so this is really where it gets frustrating, right? I mean, Germany's burning more coal right now than 13 years ago when they started their clean power plan. There are strategic disadvantages to a lot of the regulatory environment. You can't get piped to the coast, but even if you can get it to the coast, various different countries all across the world, there's no place to onboard LNG. The tanker capacity doesn't exist. We don't have any of these quick-term solutions, but when you look at a state like mine from North Dakota, we talk about the shale revolution, you can talk about the Permian in Texas, Powder River in Wyoming, but since the United States left the Paris Climate Accords in 2017, we're the only country to lower our carbon emissions. You know why? The Bakken. This isn't a shale play anywhere else. This is an offshore. It's because of the Bakken. Because we discovered natural gas. We produce it cleaner and more efficiently than anywhere else on the planet. And the United States lowered our carbon emissions because of the natural gas we're producing in the Bakken. And instead of celebrating that, instead of celebrating small American North Dakota companies that are putting people to work, that have revitalized communities that quite frankly were dying prior to this oil boom, we have an entire administration and a climate activist left that is trying to demonize what makes my state great.
No, that's spot on, and such an important point, right, about doing it cleanly. The demand doesn't disappear, so you either get it from North Dakota or you get it from countries that do it dirtier and more corrupt.
We'd shut down every coal plant in North Dakota tomorrow. The world's going to burn more coal next year. That's the reality. We have a tremendous resource that is utilized and necessary for people to turn the lights on. We deal with this right in August. I always used to say, you want to talk about cheap, affordable, reliable energy? Don't send anybody home for August. Make us stay in D.C. for the entire month of August. Turn off the air conditioning.
Yeah.
See how people recognize it then.
Yeah.
And for us, it's different, right? In February, we can go 20 days in a row before it's above zero.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of whether or not you can heat your house or not. It's a matter of whether people freeze to death or not. So it's important.
Absolutely. And so what should this administration do and what can Congress do, maybe let's say next year, to really turn the tide and get better energy policy in place?
Well, I think we have an opportunity. I think because of it, if you believe as I do that about 70% of all the inflationary pressures essentially go back to energy, right? And we know this, whether it's your inputs for fertilizer, anhydrous, diesel fuel, all of the different things, truck driving, all of those different things raising it. And I think our friends, our allies in Europe recognize that maybe they were sold a bag of goods by a lot of different people and relying on on Vladimir Putin for their entire energy cost because they're not going to do it with offshore wind, maybe we should start having a conversation. Unfortunately, I think it's become such a zealotry for too many people on this energy thing that facts don't matter anymore. So we have to convince the people that we can convince. Permitting reform, litigation reform. We know this better than most in North Dakota because we're the geographic center of North America. So we have to get our product to market. And our biggest constraints aren't getting the oil out of the ground, aren't getting the natural gas out of the ground, and isn't getting wheat out of the field. It's the permitting and getting that product to market. And that's where like agencies like FERC have really been problematic. You know, FERC wasn't exactly the most nimble organization to begin with, but in the middle of an energy crisis, when we have a president flying to Saudi Arabia and giving fist bumps, begging OPEC to increase production, you also have the same administration telling FERC that before you can put pipe in the ground, you got to mitigate upstream carbon and downstream carbon. Anybody who understands how the pipeline industry works knows that if you have to mitigate the carbon of the oil well and the SUV, you're not getting a piece of pipe in the ground. It's not happening. And we have to get this stuff. It's still the cheapest, safest way to transport these products. And turns out the entire country needs them, and so does the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned one of the things that, among the other consequences of bad energy policy has been higher prices, right? It's been this inflation that it's at its highest point in 40 years and the uncertainty in the investment markets and all of that. You mentioned that the energy industry has revitalized a lot of communities, and now, these communities are being devastated, kind of across your state, really across the country, facing food prices that are up double digits, grocery prices, energy prices, what have you. I mean, how has this inflation brought on by bad energy policy and overspending really impacted families in your state?
Well, it impacts them in the most significant way. I mean, depending on the metrics you lose, since President Biden took office, most families have lost right around $7,000 in disposable income. The way I've heard it told this, do you know many people who can afford to miss an entire month's paycheck? Because I don't. Yeah. And that's essentially what inflation has done to every family. And again, when you're part of the solution, you can do all of these things, and this is all getting chewed up somewhere that it isn't actually going to the ag producer. It isn't going to the cattle rancher, and it isn't going to the energy companies. And listen, in North Dakota, we deal with floods, we deal with droughts, we deal with blizzards, we deal with hail, we deal with all of those things. We can handle that. What we can't handle is the federal government telling us how to do something we do really well.
And it seems like, obviously some of the problems that were caused by COVID and the recovery and the spending that was necessitated, this administration and this Congress just piled on, right? Last spring, there was nearly $2 trillion in spending. This year, they've done it again and again and again, really. Do you feel like there's no lessons learned there? What about here in Congress and your allies in Congress? Has there been lessons learned, and how do you think things will change?
I hope so. Somebody asked me earlier today, actually, what's the shortest term threat to the United States? And I said it's a combination. It's Russia's aggression into the Ukraine and what that means in the geopolitical world with Taiwan and China and all of those different issues. And it's inflation. Those are the two short-term things. The biggest long-term national security threat we face is our debt. And it is, and it continues to be. And we came into the beginning of COVID where we worked in a bipartisan manner, and there are bills I voted for at the beginning of the COVID pandemic that I would never vote for ever again, or I would never have voted for before, but we were in a really unique scenario. What I didn't understand, and I still cannot understand, is after 18 months, 2 years into this, why we didn't target spending to places that needed it. We just continued to spray money that we don't have with a fire hose onto the economy, and then thought that inflationary pressures wouldn't be there. And one of the other frustrating things out here, far too many people say, well, Europe or all these other countries are in the same boat. Well, they actually did the same thing except worse. To compare us to other countries and say we're handling it better because we sprayed less of our GDP into the economy without paying for it is really, really a false argument, and I think we should get serious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we've struggled with at Americans for Prosperity is making sure that spending stays a top priority issue. Obviously, when times are good, people are paying less attention to government overspending. Do you think because of this inflation crisis, there will be a renewed focus on reining in government spending as we go forward?
Well, I can talk about it. I'll just talk about the infrastructure bill, right? If inflation stays higher than 7% year over year, you just wipe out the entire increase of what you did in the highway funding formula. 100%. You just wipe it all out. And at the same time, you can go to any community anywhere in the country right now, and you will see a construction project delayed, whether it's a school, whether it's an airport. We have a project in North Dakota that was $41 million to get built. It's for a fantastic facility. It's $57 million now. You know what they've changed? Nothing. They haven't changed a thing. And just because of inflation and construction and workforce and all of these different issues, it's gone up to $57 million. Yeah. That is the problem. That's where we're at. So listen, nobody hates Santa Claus. It's very easy to give people things and particularly do that, and both parties are guilty of this. Mm-hmm. But people are seeing the real consequences of what happens when you continue to fund things with money that you do not have and just continue to print it. And it's a problem, and unfortunately we don't have the federal, interest rates are going up. Home buying is stagnant for the first time in 15 years. We've got real structural problems in our economy, and fixing them quickly is not going to be as easy as people think. But first of all, let's just get a budget and stick to it. That'd be a pretty good idea. Get back to normal order. Continue. We're going to vote on a CR this week. I'm going to vote no on a CR. I think I voted for 1 2-week CR because North Dakota was in a flood and my farmers and ranchers couldn't afford to have FSA shut down for 2 weeks, and sometimes you just have to deal with those issues. But we have to quit governing by crisis. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty proud. My North Dakota constituents have been in on the debt since I got elected in 2018. This isn't really new to them. We have a balanced budget amendment in the state, and we always have to balance our budget, so it's something we're pretty conscious of. Plus, if you live in a place that has droughts and blizzards and commodity-based economies, you know how to spend when you have the money, and you know how to tighten your belt when you don't. So at least places like North Dakota have been aware of this and are going to continue to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. States have been doing this right for a long time. Some of those pressures, as you mentioned, they don't exist typically on Washington, but it's something we're going to continue to drive the ball forward on, and certainly we'll hope it's a major priority next year to do something on spending, because spending has been a major driver of the increased costs that people are facing. Are there specific things that you want to see Congress do on government spending? Are you open to ideas? How are you approaching that conversation?
I think we should absolutely have a 10-year balanced budget. I would like to see it shorter. I think a lot of conservatives would like to see it shorter. I don't think it's realistic. First of all, austerity measures are inherently not popular, and you can't govern if you're not if you're not there. But I think having a realistic baseline 10-year budget that we are committed to sticking to. Two, I think we're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. The response that fight always gets interesting, but it's true. We have to raise the debt ceiling, but we need. And there are people that even in the minority, it's easy to vote no on the debt ceiling. In the majority, it gets a lot harder. That's why when we voted no the last time, we made sure we kind of let leadership on our side know. Said when we do this, and we will do it, we want reform in the process. We need it. We're not just blank checking this again and again. It's like your 19-year-old kid or your 20-year-old college kid who keeps maxing out their credit card. If you don't figure out a way to get that under control, you're not doing them any good either, because they're never going to learn how to manage money their entire life. And that's essentially what the federal government is doing right now. So we are going to have some opportunities. We just have to have the political courage to do it.
And I think the American people have learned some tough lessons too. All those free checks from the government, they don't feel so good when you're paying for them in the form of $5 a gallon gasoline.
No, and I think in the other answers, we talk about all the things that are triaging right now, and unfortunately there's a lot of them, but healthcare is going to come right back into this conversation, and Republicans get beat up on healthcare all the time, but you know what, Obamacare has been the law of the land for a while now, and healthcare gets an F rating by constituents in the United States from one end of the country to the other, and the solution to healthcare policy is not continuing to subsidize and over-subsidize the same failed policies. We have to have more transparency. The relationship needs to get back to the doctor and the patient, and we have to do some of those things. But you also can't have fake negotiations with Medicare, which is essentially, if you don't agree to my price, I'm putting a 17% tax on it, because we have to continue to develop cures and treat people, but we have to deliver healthcare in a more transparent and affordable way.
No, and that's a good segue. I want to ask you about some of the things this administration has done just in the last few weeks as far as dumping money onto our problems without any kind of structural reform. They've now done it twice to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, the Inflation Reduction Act and then the student loan cancellation. So let's go to the Inflation Reduction Act first. Of course, the name is complete nonsense. It's not going to make any impact on inflation, but it is going to raise taxes. It does raise spending. What do you see as the thought process there that they had versus what Congress and this administration, need to do better going forward?
Well, I think you're exactly right. Even by whatever fake sunsets and metrics you put into it, you don't see the first savings on that spending, even if you agree with the Democratic sunsets until late 2025. 80% of it doesn't come out until after 2028. So you tell me how that's going to help inflation in the immediate term. Secondly, and this is something that's really important to a place like North Dakota, half of that $750 billion bill is Green New Deal policies. You can call them whatever you want, but that is detrimental to my egg producers, my energy producers, and the economies all across the state of North Dakota. And you would think in the real world, after watching what has happened in California, after watching what has happened in Germany, and after what is happening in all throughout Europe with this energy crisis, that there'd be this big blinking red stop sign that says, hey, maybe we should probably not go down this path because it won't work. But we don't live in the real world. We live in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly the road we're going down. I'm not worried about it succeeding because it can't. I'm worried about how many North Dakota companies and family farms go out of business in the mechanism of failing. Because what I don't want to see is more consolidation in the ag market and more consolidation in the energy market. And the Inflation Reduction Act is legitimately a terrible piece of legislation.
Yeah, and bills like that, they're so big and there's so much going on. I mean, you mentioned there was bad energy policy, there were tax increases, there's the overall impact of the additional spending. What were you hearing in your state about that bill when it was being debated, the coverage in the press and all of that? What were people really saying about what was going to happen to them, their family, their businesses?
So the people who support it will always go to the insulin piece, which is very, very recognizable. Insulin should not be the cost of what it is. But even in the insulin piece, you got to remember, it only benefited those on Medicare. And it doesn't lower the cost for anybody else in the healthcare system. Well, that means one of two things is going to happen. Either the cost is going to go up and we'll deal with it with benefit, or the cost is going to be associated across all of the non-Medicare patients in the healthcare system. So Republicans have a plan where it's a $50 cap on top of that. So you hear that from the supporters. But listen, in my state, it's pretty easy for people to recognize when you are going to bring utopian energy policies that are directly harmful to everybody. It doesn't, whatever business you're in North Dakota, whatever business you're in, you're essentially in the ag and energy business. We are as diverse of an economy as we've ever been, but we're pretty top heavy with those two because nothing scales up like ag and energy. And people are recognizing very quickly that this administration is hostile to production agriculture and onshore energy development.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about one more thing. Just a couple weeks ago, this administration unilaterally canceled, more than $400 billion in student loans. There is zero, constitutional authority for them to do that. They overstepped Congress, even according to Nancy Pelosi. But those are all discussions the average American is probably not following too closely as far as the governing dynamics. Just the policy alone, the decision to cancel student loan debt when working class families are struggling so much. What were people saying in your state about that decision?
Well, there's two things, particularly with North Dakota. So we're the only state with a state bank. And so about a decade ago, the State Bank of North Dakota ran a consolidation program for student loans where you could lower your interest rate, you could consolidate all your federal loans. Anybody with student loan debt that's financially responsible did that. So nobody in North Dakota who has done that qualifies for this. So it's a uniquely personal thing for people in North Dakota who made the responsible decision 10 years ago and now can't take advantage of it. But it's not a cancellation of debt. It's the biggest redistribution of wealth I think a president has ever done. Less than 60% of the student loan debt goes to the top 40% of income earners. Less than 20 goes to the bottom 40% of income earners. You are literally redistributing wealth from blue-collar guys who are responsible, who have good jobs, to Ivy League people who can't afford to pay for their philosophy degree. That is what happened. It's terrible policy. There's nothing to cap the cost of tuition in this. No safeguards to ever make sure this doesn't happen again. And you are taking money from the working class and giving it to people who have an education that they can't pay for. Student loan, and the cost of education, student loans is a problem. But it's a more complex solution because one of the reasons we have this in discharges is so that people who traditionally wouldn't qualify for college have the ability to go to it. That's a great thing. We don't want to lose that. But we have to figure out two things. One, bring the cost of four-year education down. And two, make sure we're educating a workforce for a 21st century economy. I'm a psych major and a law degree. Nobody likes book learning as much as I do. But to be quite frank, you can make a really great career being a welder, being a linesman, doing all of these things, and you can make a whole lot of money with a lot less student done. That's not a job, it's a career. And you can do those things. So we have to have that conversation. But again, subsidizing failed policy in order to be for a political gain is not good policy. And it's going to cost this country $420 billion plus more because it's going to drive up inflation even more than it is now.
Absolutely. It seems like that's been the theme of every major decision this administration has made is dumping more money onto a problem without any structural reforms, ultimately making problems worse, but perhaps winning political favor with their allies. And frankly, Congressman, we've done probably hundreds of these over the last couple of years during the pandemic. We were virtual and all of that, but I think you in particular, your state, really has just become such a microcosm of what good policy can do on one end and what bad policy can really do on the other.
And we have so many good things going on. You know, we've got a soybean crushing plant coming in. It's a combination between ag and energy. We're making renewable diesel in the western part of the state. We're using soybeans from the eastern part of the state. It's value-added ag for some of our smaller communities that haven't grown like the east and the west. It's perfect. But the biggest problem we have is the federal government. We're leading in carbon capture, and the reason is because we have EPA primacy. If we didn't have EPA primacy, we'd be nowhere on any of this stuff and how you deal with it. And listen, you can talk about carbon capture how you want. We're not starting from zero, right? Like when you subsidize renewable energy onto the grid in a place where you make it just infeasible to burn coal or natural gas, you have to equate to this. And more importantly, I think consumers are demanding it. You know, we don't need to regulate it. One thing you can say about energy producers and ag producers, we're pretty good at giving customers what they want. Just stay out of our way and let us do it.
Absolutely. One last question for you. I think one of the miracles of the energy industry in North Dakota that you touched on briefly is its ability to lift up struggling communities and families that were hopeless for a while there. Can you talk a little bit about what fiscal responsibility and pro-growth, energy abundance have done to really lift up families and communities in your state? So
the Red River Valley in the eastern part of North Dakota is some of the most fertile farmland in the world, and I think that's something people miss because we have pretty good winters. But it's pretty hard to scratch a living out of western North Dakota. We're a cattle rancher trying to grow stuff out there, and we've had communities that have been struggling to survive forever. And when I graduated high school in Dickinson, North Dakota in 1995, there's less than 8 of my graduating class that are still there because there were no jobs, there were no opportunities. And now we are absolutely growing and thriving, and people are living next. They don't have to fly home for Thanksgiving or Easter. They get to have dinner with their brothers and their sisters and their mom and their dad. And you know, we have a daycare shortage. The best solution to daycare is if grandma can watch her kids for a couple days. And all of this stuff is fantastic. And I think that's one of the things Republicans and conservatives have to get about. We talk about energy dominance and national security and being the only country in the world that is both food and energy secure. And those things are all true. And North Dakota's proud of being a part of that. But what this is really about is communities. I mean, I love the coal industry, but I don't particularly, like, if a coal plant makes it or doesn't, isn't necessarily my number one concern. The free market will solve that if it's truly a free market. But for us, it's 5 communities. Like, if that coal plant goes out of business, we lose 5 communities. They go away. The school goes away, the property tax goes away, the jobs go away. These are places that, like, we live and play and work and hunt in, and it's incredibly important to us, and we're really proud of what we do. And so we like the fact that we are an absolute energy and agricultural powerhouse, not just in the United States, but in the entire world. And we're proud of it, and we're proud that our communities are growing, and we're proud that we can do it. We feed and fuel the world, and we want to keep doing it for as long as you'll let us.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate that. Obviously, we can see your passion. Americans for Prosperity in North Dakota appreciates what you've been doing here for residents of that state, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. We really appreciate your time today and hope you'll continue to fight.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thanks.